This terrifying footage shows a sightseeing helicopter plunging into the Hudson River, turning a family outing above Manhattan's misty skyline into a nightmare that ended in tragedy. On board were 6 passengers, a couple who both worked for the global tech giants Siemens, and their 3 children, hoping for a magical view of the city from above. But just 16 minutes after takeoff, their dream ride became a death trap, crashing into the icy waters near the George Washington Bridge. At first, it looked like a freak accident, but now chilling new details are emerging and they paint a far more disturbing picture. Behind the pretty skyline tours lies a pattern of negligence, ignored warnings, and companies with long histories of safety violations. Turns out this wasn't just bad luck. It was a tragedy waiting to happen. The result of an industry that's been gambling with lives for years, all for profit. It was just before 3 p.m. on Thursday, April 10th, 2025, when a Bell 206 sightseeing helicopter lifted off from a Wall Street heliport. It started like any normal tour, gliding past the Statue of Liberty, cruising up the west side of Manhattan, heading towards the George Washington Bridge. Then it looped south, skimming closer to the Jersey side. But exactly at 3:15 p.m., 16 minutes into the flight, the chopper vanished from the radar, just like that. People on the ground said that they heard loud bangs. Some thought it sounded like gunshots. Others described it as a sonic boom. When they looked up, it was like something out of a nightmare. The helicopter spinning wildly before crashing straight into the Hudson River. Cell phone footage caught it all in horrifying detail. The chopper literally came apart mid-air. Its tail and rotor blades snapped off before it nosedived into the water near Jersey City. It hit hard, flipped over, and sank. The only thing left visible, a single piece of landing gear sticking out of the water, like a haunting reminder of what had just happened.
The terrifying final moments of the helicopter flight. It captured on video as it fell out of the sky and plunged into New York City's Hudson River.
We have multiple boats still in the water conducting searches for any additional occupants of the aircraft.
These images showing the chopper turned upside down in the water.
The
plane was turned around, sitting there in the water, almost like it was floating.
I just happened to be walking and I heard it sounded like an engine just dying, and it was like do 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 do, and I just turned, I looked, and I saw the helicopter crash and splash into the water.
Rescue crews rushed to the scene as fast as they could, hoping, praying that someone might have made it. But by the time they got there, it was already too late. First responders searched the water for hours, and by around 8 p.m., a floating crane pulled what was left of the helicopter from the river. Then came the heartbreaking update. All 6 people on board had been found. 3 adults, 3 children. 4 were already gone when rescuers got to them. The remaining 2, both kids, were rushed to the hospital, but sadly they didn't make it.
We were met by the first responders and they told us they did everything they can to try to save these victims, and you can see the trauma on their face.
The victims were a family. Augustin Escobar, 49, his wife Merce Camprubi Montal, 40. Their 3 beautiful kids, 10-year-old Augustin, 8-year-old Merce, and little 4-year-old Victor. And the pilot, Son Kesey Johnson, only 36. All of them gone in an instant. It's the kind of loss that leaves everyone reeling, shocked, heartbroken, trying to make sense of something that feels so senseless.
I have the entire family members, we're lifting them up in prayer.
Before we dive into the crash itself, the technical stuff, the investigations, the what went wrongs, let's pause and talk about who these people were. Because they weren't just names on a headline. They had full lives, big dreams, bright futures, and in a blink, all of that ended in the Hudson River. The family was originally from Barcelona. Augustin had worked at Siemens for nearly 3 decades, climbing the ranks to become global CEO for rail infrastructures at Siemens Mobility. He was a big deal in the energy and transport world, leading major international teams, traveling across continents, and helping shape how infrastructure operates globally. At one point, he even served as president and CEO of Siemens Spain. But beyond the titles and the achievements, people who knew him say that he was was a family man first, a good guy, kind, fun, loved his kids more than anything. And Mercè, she was just as accomplished. Born and raised in Barcelona, she came from a family with deep roots in the city and in FC Barcelona. Her great-grandfather and grandfather both served as club presidents. Her grandfather, Agustí Montal Costa, even helped bring Johan Cruyff, yes, that Johan Cruyff, to the club back in the 70s. Most recently, her brother Joan was even being talked about as a potential future president of the team. Professionally, Mercè held her own. She had a solid 16-year run at Siemens and was a global commercialization manager. She worked across the US, Latin America, Europe, a serious resume. But for her and Agustín, it was never just about work. They built a life full of meaning, adventure, and legacy together. Their kids, Agustín, Mercè, and little Victor, were all still so young, whole lives ahead of them. They came to New York for a celebration. Agustín had flown in a week earlier for business, and that Thursday, Mercè and the kids joined him. It was supposed to be a birthday trip for Mercè's 40th and their son's 8th, which was that very day. Her actual birthday wasn't until June, but the timing worked. It was all about just being together. There are pictures right before the flight. Agustín and his son giving each other a thumbs up, like they were gearing up for the best day ever. Mercè glowing, smiling wide as she held her youngest close, and one of the kids sitting up front beside the pilot, just beaming. They all looked so happy, like this was gonna be one of those core memories. But just 16 minutes later, everything changed. The pilot at the center of this heartbreaking story was Sean Kesey Johnson, but everyone just called him Sean. He wasn't just some guy behind the controls, he was a US Navy vet who'd served from 2006 to 2018, over a decade of dedication. After his time in the military, he shifted gears and got his commercial helicopter license in August 2023. Still fresh in the civilian aviation world, but already had 788 flight hours under his belt. The man wasn't playing. He was committed, sharp, and clearly working towards something bigger. He'd flown rescue missions in California, helped with agricultural operations in Virginia, you name it. Aviation wasn't just a job for Sean, it was a calling. And when he wasn't flying, he was known for being the life of the party. Charming, hilarious, bit of a jokester, but when it came to work, total switch off. According to his friend Bobby Rose Smith, Sean was that guy who double-checked everything. He crossed his T's and dotted every I, she said. He took flight safety seriously. No matter where he was or what kind of helicopter he was flying, he had that Navy discipline built into his DNA.
He had a work ethic unlike any other.
The man was an amazing pilot. I highly doubt it's going to come back to anything that he did wrong.
Sean had also used his aviation gigs to travel around the country. He loved the freedom that came with the job. Eventually, he made his way to New York City, taking a job with New York Helicopters, flying tours for excited tourists eager to see the skyline from the sky. He was building his life, finding his rhythm, and then, just like that, it was all gone. After the crash, Sean's father posted something that just hit everyone in the heart. "I love you, son." That was it, and somehow that said everything. During a press conference, New York City Mayor Adams spoke about Sean's service, acknowledging how much Johnson had given to this country.
He fought to defend this country, and we want to acknowledge him and his wife, Catherine, for her loss.
Mercè's brother Joan, who had flown in from Spain to identify his sister's body and those of her husband and kids, also spoke at the press conference. His voice cracked as he said their names.
They left together, they left without suffering, and they left with a smile on their faces. And that's important for us.
Joan shared how much love and support had poured in from all over the world, strangers, friends, family, people showing up in big and small ways. One of the most heartbreaking moments came when Joan, Mercè's brother, quietly walked to the edge of the Hudson River, the same water that took his entire family. There were no cameras flashing, no microphones in his face, just him and the grief. Slowly, he let a few flowers slip from his hand into the water, one by one. A silent goodbye, no one ever wants to give. Mayor Eric Adams was there standing nearby. He laid flowers too, this time for Sean, the pilot. It was solemn, it was heavy. Everyone felt it. That same day, Siemens, the company Augustin and Mercier worked for, released a statement expressing their sorrow. We are deeply saddened by the tragic helicopter crash in which Augustin Escobar and his family lost their lives. Our heartfelt condolences go out to all of their loved ones. Even Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez responded, writing in Spanish on social media, "I share in the grief of the victims' loved ones at this heartbreaking time." Behind the scenes, investigators were racing to understand what exactly went wrong. The NTSB confirmed that teams had been digging through every detail: maintenance records, flight history, the pilot's credentials. As of last September, Sean had clocked 450 hours of flight time. By late March, that number was up to 788. That's a lot of hours in just a few months, and it makes you wonder what kind of pressure he might have been under. And the weather was less than forgiving. Clouds thick in the sky, wind gusts punching up to 25 miles per hour. On paper, visibility was fine, 10 miles, but something was brewing. A storm system creeping in, light rain starting to fall, and that cold, biting air. The water in the Hudson, a bone-chilling 50 degrees. You don't walk away from that if you go under. Then comes the kicker. The helicopter had no flight recorder, no black box, no data. So now federal investigators are doing this the hard way. They're tearing into what's left of the wreckage, focusing in on the rotors and the engine, hoping the mechanicals can talk where the tech can't. Meanwhile, highly trained divers are down there in the cold, dark muck of the Hudson River. Visibility is awful, the current's working against them, but they're still out there hunting for the final pieces, trying to rebuild the crash, bolt by shattered bolt.
We also are aware that there are dive teams. The New York Police Department is still diving for components and pieces of the helicopter that we are still looking to recover.
If they're able to get the rotor blades back ashore, one of the things that they're going to be looking at very carefully is any potential for cracks, any deformation, anything that would indicate not only what happened, but how it happened.
The helicopter in question was a Bell 206. It's owned by a Louisiana company called Meriden Helicopters. They lease and fix up choppers, but the one flying that day was being operated by New York Helicopter. Michael Roth, the CEO, said that his company has been around for 30 years, but nothing like this had ever happened on their watch. After the crash, Roth was clearly shaken. He said he and his family were absolutely heartbroken and that his wife hadn't stopped crying since it happened. He told reporters that the pilot had radioed in saying he needed to refuel and was getting ready to land. That landing spot was only about 3 minutes away, but for some reason, 20 minutes went by and the chopper never arrived. Roth said that he started to get a ton of phone messages before one of his other pilots flew over the Hudson and saw the helicopter upside down. We're a small company. I'm a father and a grandfather, and we are just devastated. But here's where it gets concerning. This isn't the first time New York Helicopters has had an issue like this. Back in 2013, one of their helicopters, also a Bell 206, had to make an emergency landing in the same river after losing power mid-flight. But wait, it doesn't stop there. In 2015, another one of their helicopters had issues. This time, the pilot had to make an emergency landing in New Jersey after hovering about 20 feet in the air. Not exactly your average landing, and when the FAA checked it out, they found signs of corrosion that looked like someone had tried to remove it. And some of the parts were so messed up, they weren't even considered safe to fly. And here's the kicker. That same helicopter had already been in a crash back in 2010. Like, how many red flags do we need? Later on, the NTSB came out and said the drive shaft on that chopper was flat out unairworthy. Translation, that thing should have never been in the sky to begin with. And the sketchiness doesn't stop there. It turns out that the company has been having financial problems too. According to court documents, they filed for bankruptcy in 2019. The reason? New air traffic rules in New York City were choking their business. stricter flight routes, no flying on Sundays because of noise complaints. It was a lot. Basically, they were bleeding money. Fast forward to this latest crash. Aviation lawyer who reviewed the crash footage said what many were already thinking. This wasn't just some fluke. He called it a catastrophic mechanical failure that left the pilot with zero chance to recover. One theory, the helicopter's main rotors may have struck the tail boom, snapping it apart and causing the entire cabin to drop straight down. No control, no time to react, just gone. Now, here is where things really start stacking up. According to FAA records, this same helicopter had a known maintenance issue just last September, specifically the transmission assembly. A report from the FAA's Service Difficulty Reporting System said that there was metal in the oil, which is basically the transmission's version of waving a red flag. Even worse, they found a bearing that was literally flaking apart. At the time, this bird had already racked up over 12,700 flight hours. That is a lot of wear for a machine that is supposed to fly safely over one of the busiest cities in the world. Then comes the day of the crash, and y'all, it was a mess. The chopper was flying in a special flight rules area, which means the pilot didn't have to stay in constant communication with air traffic control. And just before everything went south, the pilot radioed in with something chilling. They were low on fuel. So now we're talking a mechanical history, high mileage, sketchy maintenance, and it may have been running on empty? That is not just negligence, that is dangerous. And now the FAA just announced they're shutting down New York helicopter tours immediately. No warnings, no temporary suspensions, just shut down. And they're not stopping there. They've launched a full investigation into the company's license and safety record. Their message, public safety is the top priority, and they are taking this very seriously.
They want to look at all the safety records, how things were operating there, who was there, and they also are concerned that this tour company retaliated against one of its employees, its director of operations, when that director of operations responded to the FAA's request and grounded the fleet. So we will see what happens going forward, but they are not allowed to fly again.
But here's what's interesting. Even before that decision came down, Senator Chuck Schumer had already started calling these companies out. He said what a lot of people were already thinking, that it is not always the pilots who are at fault, but the tour companies themselves. They're cutting corners, ignoring safety protocols, and putting profits ahead of people's lives.
Is offering the same kind of flights that just took the lives of these 6 people, but now because of the crash they're giving a 70% discount, a special. Outrageous. I am urging the FAA to pull their operating certificate immediately. We know there is one thing for sure about New York City's helicopter tour companies. They have a deadly track record.
And unfortunately, this is not far-fetched. New York skies have a history of tragic helicopter crashes, especially involving tourist flights. Since 1977, at least 32 people have died in helicopter accidents in the city. In 1977, a helicopter on the roof of the Pan Am building malfunctioned while passengers were boarding. It tipped over and the rotor blades killed 4 people, including a well-known film director, and a broken piece even fell to the street below, killing a pedestrian. Then, in 2009, a sightseeing helicopter collided mid-air with a small plane over the Hudson. All 9 people involved died, including 5 Italian tourists. Fast forward to 2018, and a Liberty Helicopters tour flight operated by Fly Nyon crashed into the East River. 5 lives were lost that day, and the reason? It was a doors-off flight, and the passengers couldn't escape their safety harnesses after the chopper hit the water. They drowned. It was devastating and preventable. That tragedy led to a $116 million lawsuit and pushed the FAA to tighten its rules around those kinds of flights. Then, just a year later in 2019, another incident. A helicopter crash landed on the roof of a Midtown skyscraper. The pilot, Tim McCormick, an experienced and respected aviator, didn't survive. Investigators believe a mechanical failure may have been to blame.
It is a well-regulated industry. It has to meet FAA standards. But there have been some tragic crashes around the country and around the world involving air tour helicopters. You know, the idea is to give passengers somewhat of a thrill ride, and sometimes that increases the risk to these types of flights.
So now we're seeing the system trying to respond. After this latest crash, Senator Chuck Schumer is calling for stricter enforcement, specifically more ramp inspections, which are those unannounced checks to make sure companies are playing by the rules. City Councilwoman Amanda Farias is going a step further. She's asking for a full pause on non-essential helicopter flights from city-owned heliports while the investigation plays out. In her words, it is time for a serious reevaluation of how this industry operates. But not everyone agrees. The Eastern Region Helicopter Council, basically a trade group for the helicopter industry, argues that grounding all helicopters isn't the answer. They say that the industry is mourning too, and that now isn't the time for reactionary policies. Their chairman, Jeff Smith, called out what he sees as leaders using this tragedy to push an anti-helicopter agenda. Meanwhile, the investigation is zooming in on something very specific: the maintenance. The FAA had issued 2 airworthiness directives, one in late 2022 requiring inspections of main rotor blades due to delamination, and another in mid-2023 after a helicopter lost tail router function mid-flight. Both required checks and possibly replacing critical parts, including on the very model involved in this crash. So the big question becomes, were those directives followed? Because at this point, the story is no longer just about the crash. It's about what led to it and whether the warnings were ignored. Was this really just a tragic accident, or are we looking at a case of serious negligence that could have been avoided? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this case left you shaken, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss another deep dive. We've got more twists, turns, and truth coming your way.